Before I call the meeting to order, I would like to remind everybody in the audience, if you have any comments or discussion on anything on the agenda, please come up to the presentation table. Jen, I'll call this meeting to order. Jen, will you take roll call?
Commissioner Thurl.
Here.
Commissioner Waldner.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Corbin.
Here.
Mayor Denner.
Here. We have the agenda in front of us.
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Short meeting. We got a motion and a second. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Under appearances and acknowledgement, we have David Spiegler here from senior consultant from CMG Consulting LLC, Advanced Metering Infrastructure Analysis.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with all of you. We've had the opportunity to conduct an analysis on behalf of the Madison Utilities, Water and Electric, as well as some other initiatives that may benefit from system automation. To give you a sense of, I'll give you sort of right up front what the results of the analysis are, and then I'll kind of peel the onion back. We developed an analysis around what we would consider smart grid and smart water, building an advanced metering infrastructure and then layering on other programs that may add value for electric and water operations through automation. What we have found is that by identifying specific programs that add value based on the characteristics of the grid and the water distribution system and based on the state of operations as they stand right now, there were a number of programs that penciled out very, very nicely. In fact, what we've developed is an overall business case. As you'll see from the results up here, there's a net present value of a positive $1.8 million. The internal rate of return is 21.6%. This is on a 10-year forecast period, and there's an 8-year payback. So it's a very attractive business case. I've been involved in these kinds of analyses for 18 years now for over 200 utilities, and this is, I wouldn't say the best, but it's certainly a strong one by comparison to many that we've done. Now, one of the things that we looked at as a possibility in addition to smart grid and smart water is the possibility of adding broadband capabilities within the community. Now, broadband costs a lot of money. We've been involved in a lot of programs to enable municipal broadband projects. The project we think is prudent and is worthwhile to consider, but the economics are something that you have to take into account. So if we take that same smart grid, same smart water project and add broadband capacity into it, it extends the payback from 8 years to 12. It lowers the internal rate of return from 21% down to about 12%. With the comparable NPV. So what we've done as a core business case, I've spent some time today with Brad sharing some of the results of the analysis, and in the presentation that you have in front of you there, the paper version has some graphs and charts and tables that are not included in this version just for brevity's purposes, but we've run this scenario a couple of different ways, including broadband and without. The one that you have is without the broadband. But what we have included is 6 other programs. It involves advanced metering plus 6 other we'll call use cases. From a central application perspective, that is affecting both electric and water, connect-disconnect, enabling connect-disconnect capabilities on the meters, and enabling a prepaid metering system. From electric, we looked at 3 programs, a conservation voltage that would enable us to reduce the voltage at the distribution bus at the substation during peak periods to be able to reduce the wholesale demand charges, energy management, some smart thermostats that will also allow us to reduce the system peak, and an energy storage project that offers some potential, especially with the potential for TruShrimp coming into the community as well. And on the water side, we're looking at a smart pumping project, which would enable us to use system data to be able to change the pumping schedule so that it aligns, so that the majority of the pump operations are handled during off-peak periods, not during on-peak. So during the project, we were asked to do the following 3 things. One is to conduct a system analysis the results of which I've shared with you here. The second is a migration strategy to think about how do we get from where we are today to where ultimately you'd like to be in the long term, and then take all of that information to prepare a final set of recommendations and supporting analysis, which is what we've delivered here. So we looked at, as I mentioned, a number of different use cases. The 6 that I mentioned were not all of the ones that we looked at. We also looked at, from an electric operations perspective, we looked at an outage management perspective. We looked at smart city and asset management from a centralized, and we also looked at leak detection and water quality. We decided after conducting analysis that those programs were not feasible, or I mean they're feasible, but they're not economically justified here in Madison. And a large reason for that is that there are certain aspects of your operations that are actually quite efficient. So for example, in outage management, your reliability is fairly good. So investing a lot of money to make it slightly better probably is not a worthwhile use of funds. But in some of the other areas, the ones that are highlighted in green, we do recommend. Again, the one in yellow, broadband, is the one that we have a question mark. It's a significant investment, so we've held it off from the analysis that you see today, but it is something that could be worth considering going forward. And just to illustrate,
Can I
yes,
back up?
Yeah.
Back up.
Mhm.
Maybe I missed something.
Yes.
You had a comment for me. Why do you have broadband highlighted there?
because it's a maybe. The red ones are no, the green are yes, the yellow is a maybe, that it may be worth considering in the future. But the green are definitely recommended.
Let me, if I may, go just a little deeper. I think this will help Kelly as well. When you're talking about that, you're talking about having the city municipal provide the broadband.
Correct.
to them and-
Yes.
So,
Right.
okay.
And
Yeah.
And thank you for that clarification. It is a worthwhile point to highlight the fact that we've modeled broadband if the city went ahead, as you just mentioned, it built out the whole system and operated it. There are other options where you can build the so-called middle mile and then lease that access to another provider and whatnot. There are a lot of different shades of gray, but we've chosen the one that seemed to make the most sense for now, and that one is the one that we're saying is a maybe.
If we were a municipality without broadband providers, we'd be all over this. But we have 4 right now, I think, within the community, 2 very good ones, so,
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. So what I've done here is I've laid out 3 different scenarios of the financials, and what I'll do is, if I could, I'll just stand and point to things here. So I've provided 3 different scenarios. All the use cases, that is all the ones that were highlighted in red, green, and the broadband. This is taking the red ones out, the ones that don't make sense, and then taking broadband out. And so you can see the comparison between business cases. If we look at the program benefits, it goes from $10 million to 9.7 over 10 years, down to 4.2 million. On the 10-year operating expense, about 1.2 to 800,000 to 600,000. The capital expense is 10.9, 10.1, and 2.5. So what you see here is you're losing about half the benefit. If it's just this most streamlined business case, you're losing about half the benefits, but the capital expense is like a quarter. So that's where you get that efficiency. So as a result, your net present value increases from 1.1 million to 1.8. Your internal rate of return goes from 10.5% to 21%. And peak funding, the amount of money that you would have to finance, will go from 7.6 million down to 1.4 million. So it makes it for a much more robust business case by having that so-called smart build. And the way that we identified which programs would or wouldn't make sense is from this table here. What we did is we assessed each one in isolation to look at what is the 10-year value of the benefit streams, the capital expense, the operating expense. The terminal value is meant to measure what the entity is worth at the end of 10 years. And then we added and subtracted all those values to come up with the ones that were viable. And so the net present value, the ones that are positive projects, the ones that are negative are not recommended. There are, in the presentation that you have, there are a lot more detail in terms of graphs and whatnot. And if you have any questions about that, I'll be happy to field any questions. But I wanted to turn, in the interest of time, to looking at where do we go from here and what are some recommendations about how you build this out. Because it's one thing to have a business case that's viable, it's another to make it work. And we've been involved, as I mentioned, for the better part of 2 decades in working with communities to make these things work. And so when this graphic here illustrates the concept, when you implement these kinds of programs about smart pumping or conservation voltage, there are a number of devices that are going to be put out in the distribution system, on both the electric and the water distribution systems. And a lot of people oftentimes get caught up in those devices and the management systems that are associated with them. What is really important are the pieces in the middle, the communications network and the data management protocol. And typically when municipal utilities struggle with these kinds of these endeavors, it's usually in those areas. So we recommend a lot of rigor being placed as you go through technical requirements into procurement, to making sure that the vendors you start working with have solutions for how the data is going to be coming back to you. When you put an advanced metering infrastructure plan in place, there's a flow of data coming in. Every 15 minutes, meters are read on both electric and water. Every hour, that data is downloaded back to the home office. There's a tremendous amount of data that is utilized or could be utilized. If all you're doing is warehousing the data, then effectively all you've done is change the shape of the cash register on the side of the house. What we want to do is make that data actionable. So creating data systems and communications networks that make that system actionable now enable system operators to be able to make good planning decisions on a real-time basis so that you can reduce your system demand peak, which again is a significant source of cost right now. So there are a number of best practices. I realize this is a bit of an eye chart, but I'll try and summarize this a bit. There are a lot of vendors that are out there with a lot of good systems. We're not affiliated with any of them, so it doesn't matter to us which ones you choose or don't choose. But one of the things that's really important as you go forward is to identify you have some really good legacy systems in place right now, and what you don't want to do is scrap what you've already made investments in. You want to make good use of the investments you've made and make sure that the new systems interoperate with what you already have in place. And so making sure that your new systems utilize open standards, that do not have proprietary systems that are going to require you to shoehorn your operations in with a particular vendor so you can never leave them. Those are not recommended. You want to keep to open standards. You want to build for the future. So one of the things we often tell our clients is to work not just for what your incremental goal is in terms of implementing the systems, but think about where utility and city operations are going to be in 10 years from now and build for that and require your vendors to comply with those capabilities. And then making sure you have a robust communications infrastructure, some of which seems to be in place, some of which will need to be built out. And so those are some key issues that will need to be considered as you move forward. When you do that, it's going to be very important, as I mentioned before, with the data management and the communications, that you have a central bus architecture that will enable you to manage all of that data. And again, it can be a significant amount of data that's coming through. Many utilities, and I was telling Brad, actually, we're working with Thief River Falls in Minnesota, where they did not do this, and they put an advanced metering system in place, and they're getting flooded with information, but they're not getting the full value out of it. Now the question is they have to come back, and we're helping them kind of fix that situation, putting a database so that all of that central repository of data is housed in one location, and then all these other applications can source the data as needed is really a best practice. So one of the things in that data network and that middleware is going to be critical to the overall design of the system. Now, one of the things that will have to be accounted for by any vendor that comes into Madison or any other utility for that matter is network security. There is increasingly a concern about hackers, about people with ill intent getting access to the water and or the electric distribution system. So we want to make sure that there are safety protocols in place. So network security, data compression, mobility aspects are all going to be issues that are going to be questioned of vendors as you go forward and choose the right systems that you want to move forward with. When you think about implementing these kinds of systems, I often think about the risks that are inherent with any project, and I typically think about 3 different projects, and as they relate to this one. One is the technology risk, the risk that you buy some technology and it just won't work properly. The risk of that is very, very low. And the reason I say that is because none of the systems I've mentioned would you be a pioneer on. There are electric and water utilities all across the country that have implemented these same kinds of systems. You can get references from any vendor that you were looking to work with. I would never recommend that you work with a vendor that doesn't have those kinds of references. So you should be safe when it comes to the technology risk. And furthermore, we can implement a pilot program so you test 5 or 10% of the distribution system before you implement it system-wide. The next one is the market risk, and that's a little bit riskier from the perspective of any kind of customer interface. So one of the things that is very nice about having an advanced metering infrastructure program is that you can enable a customer interface so that customers can get access to their own bills, they can answer some of their own questions, self-provision service in some limited aspects as well. So it can be very beneficial. To the extent that residents and businesses don't use the system in the way that you're planning, that can be some kind of a moderate risk, but it's not a high risk. Again, a lot of these systems are fairly proven with respect to these kinds of issues. And the overwhelming majority of the application and the power of the applications in these use cases lie with utility-facing applications rather than customer-facing interests. The biggest issue is in the execution risk, where you put these systems out, you invest a lot of money, but you don't get the kind of results that you're looking for. And that is the biggest result, and I mentioned Thief River Falls as a classic example of that, where they didn't kind of think through how to execute on their plan. And so the goal here is to protect that through, again, data mapping, workflow planning up front, rather than implementing an entire system and then trying to figure that out later on. Making sure that vendors comply with requirements up front is a way to do that. And I mentioned implementing a pilot for 5 to 10% of your overall territory is a good practice. It helps on technology and market, but it really helps when it comes to execution risk, because all of those data protocols and all the workflow processes that need to change with technology, you can test in a limited scope environment before you go full system-wide. So that can be really helpful for that as well. If there's a decision to move forward, typically it looks something like this, and I've sketched this out over a year-long, Rome was not built in a day. This would not be built in a day either. I would say over a course of a year, for the next month or two, you're looking at refining the strategy, then going into system analysis and design, trying to take the strategic level analysis, going into more technical requirements, then getting into project planning and preparation, starting to go through the procurement phase, engaging with vendors, and then from there into network deployment and testing. So what that might look like in terms of from this point forward looks something like this in 3 phases, where translating the strategic elements of this into technical requirements that you would then communicate to the vendors would be the first phase, then going through procurement, writing the RFPs, putting it out to the field, negotiating with vendors, soliciting bids, negotiating, and then coming to closure, and then finally putting together, implementing a pilot. So hypothetically, it might look like this. This is not set in stone. It can be done more aggressively. It can also be done more slowly based on what the needs of the community are. So my final slide here is in terms of next steps that I would recommend is first and foremost is decide if this is something that you're interested in doing. From financials, it looks very attractive. In meeting with Brad and the team, it sounds like there's a good opportunity to dovetail into some of the efforts that are already underway within the utility department. But that ultimately is a decision for all of you folks to make, to decide whether to move forward with that. If you do decide to do it, it probably makes sense to develop a small task force that will sort of take ownership of the operational efforts. And then, as I mentioned, the 3 phases that follow: the requirements, the procurement, and then the pilot implementation.
Well, thank you.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
In case of vendors, okay, Hartman, one of our vendors, correct?
In a way, yes.
In a way, that's where I'm already in the fog. With water, are we our own vendor?
We'd be our own vendor, plus we purchase water from Lewis and Clark. So they are our vendor for water, and then we do produce some of our own, about half.
Yeah. Just trying to get a sense of what Looking at vendors, what might be.
And in this case, like for the meter reading infrastructure, there's a myriad of different options out there, and we would have to weed out kind of what we want. And part of it, as was mentioned, was a legacy. We do have a lot of meters out there with ERTs that could be utilized for a period of time until they start to go bad with an intermediate system. We wouldn't necessarily have to have a fixed base network or something. There's some ways that we can kind of get an interim solution until we get to the point to where we have to replace those meters and then make the migration over to something that would be a long-term strategy for meter reading that gives us everything we want. And so we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We want to take what we've got, live with it until it wears out, then from there use that as the opportunity to spring into something better.
It's kind of why
Part of
we
the
did
pilot
this.
is
There's a lot of paths we could go down with water and electric meters, and so we brought these guys in to kind of help give us a little direction.
I've seen things that in here in his brief presentation that look like piloting, taking sections that are in place right now, and that's what I hear you saying. And using what we do have, something in place that we could use to build a model for ourselves.
Yeah, the reality is we're just about finished replacing all the electric meters. So we've replaced them all within the last 6-7 years, and the same with the water. We're just finishing up the last tail end of replacing all the water meters. And they usually run in about a 10-year cycle-ish, somewhere around there, just due to wear, especially on the water meters, and then just obsolescence on the electric side. Typically, they just, there's new communication systems, all that stuff, and they become more or less obsolete by the time you get to 10, 12 years and you start replacing them again. Might be able to go a little longer with the electric, but the water's generally, 10 to 15 year time frame. I know they've warranted the ones we've got now for I think 20 years if I remember right, but I don't know that they'll go that long. None of them have gone that long. So
I have a little bit of a off question, or maybe just explanation is, we're talking of like all the different networks, we're talking broadband. I mean, it'd be, in the perfect world, we have fiber to every home,
Right.
and, nice central location for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any in the industry where people are utilizing the broadband that homeowners or businesses have already within their homes? Now, I realize not everybody has, home broadband. Some, they have it just on their phone,
Right.
and that's it. So,
Mhm.
and, I don't see that being a end-all, be-all solution.
Mm-hmm.
However, I mean, it would certainly wouldn't take a whole lot of data if, say, for example, hey, you can connect, into the internet capabilities of this particular business, and we'll flood you with all the data you need with that meter, because it's in my interest as well.
Right.
Because as a consumer, as a business owner, I want that data too. I want to look at it. I want to know, okay, what are my employees doing? Can I do this better, be more
Right.
efficient? As a homeowner, same thing. Where can I be more efficient? I want to look at that data, and and I think that's one of those medium risks that you talked about. I mean, if the data is valuable to that consumer, they'll figure out how to use it. And
Right.
especially within Madison, I tend to think they're somewhat technical, and especially with our university in town and stuff too. But so, where's the industry looking at that? Are they all looking at just doing a mesh network? Do we have
Right.
to do point-to-point the stuff? I mean,
Sure. No, it's a good question. So it really depends on what the end applications. A lot of the utility applications, overwhelmingly, the utility applications are low bandwidth applications, right? It doesn't take a lot to bring meter data back, or if you have a recloser or a voltage regulator to pull that data back. And so you don't need fiber to all of your locations for that. So typically, if that's what you're looking at, then you wind up looking at more of a mesh topology. There are some of the vendors that bring their own network. There are also cellular-based systems that work well. So there are a number of, and there are trade-offs. Cellular-based systems have more operating expense, less capital expense. Fixed networks are the other way around. But a lot of them tend to be moving more toward fixed networks for that reason. Now, if you were to move into the broadband where you're building a fiber to the home application, now you have a tremendous amount of data, and you don't have to double dip. You can utilize that same network for a lot, because it's got more than enough capacity that you would need for the utility applications. There are also a number of utilities that are starting to, as you mentioned, looking into the home, that are starting to get what I'll call retail services. And they're starting to look at, I mentioned, energy management, perhaps deploying some smart thermostats and providing incentives for customers to implement those systems. There are some utilities that have actually gone in a different direction that have said, we will enable those services and we'll manage them on behalf and then charge the customer a fee for managing it, so that we'll alter your temperatures and whatnot, and we'll do that. More and more customers tend to be doing that themselves, and it is a fairly proactive business. So many utilities don't like to be in the service or in the competitive business. So we did not model that. But those are some of the trends. But from a metering and utility applications, it tends to be more of a mesh and fixed network approach.
Are you aware of any metering solutions that use you could tie the meter into a home Wi-Fi to get the data back to the utility?
There are some that are agnostic in terms of the end unit. What winds up happening typically is if you're going to be using home Wi-Fi and then you have to bring that data back out somehow, that those one-offs tend to be more cost inefficient. Because you wind up having to make a lot of exceptions. Well, these 3 homes in this cul-de-sac I'm going to build this way, these 2 I'm going to... So we've not seen a lot. There have been some vendors that have demonstrated that capability, but on a wide-scale basis, we haven't seen a tremendous amount of activity on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I see what you're thinking. You see where I'm going with that too. And I mean, it would be nice, but then you have people that move, and then they drop, and then they change to a different provider, and I mean, it could be a real, very heavy administrative cost to do that. But I mean, it's worth exploring. I mean, anything's on the table right now. So,
Right.
But I appreciate your input on that.
Yeah, sure.
And then I didn't ask you earlier, what was the market penetration on the broadband for the number of percent of customers with the dark fiber, the way we talked?
I believe we looked at a 35 or 40% penetration rate.
Okay.
Does that mean, what is it? Can you explain that to us?
Well, out of the total number of customers that were eligible, let's say we ran broadband to every customer we have, what percentage of the customers were used in the analysis to determine the profitability of the broadband, and that was roughly 35%.
Does that mean where it breaks even?
Actually, it was a net positive.
It's a slight net positive. So if we, I forget if it was 35 or 40%, but it would be a tick below that. So if we'd modeled 35, it'd probably be 33 or 34 to break even.
Thank you.
Back in
I'm curious, not to pick on Thief River Falls, but
I opened the door, so yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You said they had a lot of data available,
Right.
but they're missing opportunities.
Right.
Can you give us some examples of things they could be doing?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to be meeting with them in a couple of days because we're going through a similar process with them to put out an RFP to clean that up. So we're looking to put in a meter data management system as well as some applications for smart pumping, for outage management, different set of applications that you're looking, but also they're also electric and water. But they have a lot of data coming back into them. And all they're doing is they have manual processes. So the data comes in, and then they have the folks that work in with their customer information system, their CIS, take that information, manually put it into a different system, and basically it's keeping a team of 3 or 4 individuals employed full-time just moving data from one system to another. With the meter data management system in place, number one, it streamlines all of that. Number two, it also enables them to do things like outage management. So right now, if an outage occurs, they can see that meters are going down, but there's no way to analyze what the source of that is and how they can dispatch help to get it. So now with these additional capabilities, they'll have better tools available to them. So we're looking at integrating with their GIS system for their mapping software and basically integrating all of that data. Because, again, it's not just about the cash register on the side of the house. It's about you've created intelligent sensors out on the network that can report on the health and status of your system. So if you want to start changing your pumping schedules, you want to start looking at dropping load, doing any kind of conservation load management, those are the kinds of things that today they're not doing, but they will be in the future.
Can they identify risk, points of risk where an outage might occur
I
because
can,
of a
yeah,
weakness of that
and I
system?
can answer that. And one of the things that we can't do right now is, we do analysis on our commercial, industrial transformers that have demand on them. So we know how much they're using at any one time. We don't have any of that information on the residential. So there may be a residential transformer out there that's grossly overloaded, and we don't know.
That's kind of what
You kind of guess at what people have used in years past. Somebody moves in and does something different with the house, and next thing you know, a transformer that was perfectly fine for the last 10 years is completely overloaded. You don't know it, and eventually it's going to burn up and go away. So having this system to be able to look and take the demands, which is something we don't have right now for homes, we could have that with an AMI system. We could look at how much demand at any one peak period is on that transformer and see if we're overloading it or not. So that's one area that I know for sure that you can do now. Is that going to pay for the system? No. But it's one more thing that we can do that we can't do right now, and we can avoid problems and outages in the future because of that.
Yeah, and we actually model that, and it is a small benefit, but it is a part of it, looking at the transformer loading and predictive modeling on that. If you can get 25 years life out of a transformer, you might be able to extend that by 10% to get 27 and a half years now by doing those kinds of things. I mean, think about in this day and age, if on a one city block, if 3 people buy electric vehicles, all of a sudden the load curve of that transformer has just changed dramatically, and there's no way to know it if you don't have any data coming back.
3 DSU professors move in
Exactly, yes.
with 6 file servers each.
No.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Fun fact, about 35 years ago, back in 85, 88, the city of Madison looked at taking fiber to every home.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly the reason why we didn't, but I think if maybe at that point in time wasn't economical for us to do it. But I know that we had looked at it. Fortunately, we've had good broadband providers that have come in.
Right.
But, and that was something that we did look at, was doing the meter reading and everything as well. So this is well in tune,
Mm-hmm.
and, anything we can do to be more smart city, more effort, more data, more information, and more analytics is huge.
Right.
And it may not be huge tomorrow, but it will be in 5-10 years for sure.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Sure appreciate it.
We'll move on to the consent calendar. Does anybody want anything taken off the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Under unfinished business, do I have a motion to set bid date, bid number 886 for renovation of water building?
I'll move that.
Second.
What do we have for a date, by the way?
I believe it's in February.
February 5th?
That sounds about right.
Looks like it.
Yes, sir. My motion was Kelly, my second was
Me.
you.
Mhm.
I have a question about the bid. How long in that situation, is the bid good for? Do we define that in the specs?
We can define it, industry standard is 30 days. You can define it as being longer. You run the risk of the bid bond, people crying foul. We have, in my previous jurisdiction, held on to them for up to 60 days in certain circumstances and didn't have any problems. But we had it spelled out in the bid documents so everybody knew that the the bid, could be considered for up to 60 days, and it was not a standard bid. But that's a little bit tougher to do.
The bids are due 5th, then we're up to 5th of March.
To consider.
Rule of thumb.
Yes.
What did you put in for the budget on this? Jen, do you have it, or Brad, do you have that?
190,
190?
excuse me, 193. So this was part of your capital outlay expenditures that we did get through the 2020 budget. 38,600 in the water fund, 125,450 in the electric fund, 28,950 in the sewer, for a total of 193,000.
I don't think all of the electric was for that building, though, was it?
We've got, yes, that's a breakdown of the renovation and the sign and the concrete.
Right. The sign and the concrete weren't part of that building necessarily, so,
Right.
okay. I just want to make sure everybody knew that was,
When you talk concrete, you mean,
there's going to be some additional concrete there's going to be some on this building, but there's also some for in front of the building, and then some out back to put more transformers. One of the things that we've done in our analysis is we do not have enough spare transformers to cover all the different sizes and voltages that we have, especially in the three-phase transformers out on the system. So we need to have more available for the, unfortunate case of an outage, that we have a transformer sitting here waiting so that we don't have a business down for 3-4 days while we're trying to find a transformer. With our voltage being a little bit different than the standard, if you will, on our distribution side, spare transformers are not in great supply. And so our concrete is pretty much covered up out there right now. And as we buy more transformers, I want to be able to put them on top of concrete rather than sitting in the gravel and having the weeds growing up all around them and everything.
For me, though, Brand, is this for all three of these pieces?
Yes.
So the bid in front of us is, though, for the 193
The
budgeted.
Yeah, the concrete
Is
would
not.
not be part of this bid, other than a little piece that's in front of that actual building.
Okay, because the concrete total was 85,000.
Yes. Yes,
that
it's a big
isn't
chunk.
included in this.
There would be a small piece of
A
it,
small
possibly,
piece.
just for the piece in front of it, because we're going to have to take that, it was all humped up so that they could keep the oil inside that building, and we're going to take that hump out so you can drive straight into the building without having to go over a hump and then drop back in. And so some of that will be changed, and we'll need concrete for all that.
So then you're looking at about a $108,000 potential project if you take,
Yeah, if you, the sign, it was a $100,000 potential project for this construction, $8,000 for the sign and $85,000 for the concrete.
For the building, so we need to renovate this to make it usable for the water distribution, wastewater collection guys. And once that's complete, they'll move out of the building by Public Works. And then that becomes available for Public Works, so we don't have to do that addition that we talked about several years ago. And we set aside $250,000 for that.
We were in.
So we don't have to spend that money. So one could spend this as a cost-saving measure.
You could.
Are we going
I
to
think it's just
remodel
right
the building they're coming out of?
That's up to Gary. I can't speak to that.
At this point, we're not talking about that. No. We had no intention of that at this point, or any need, as I remember. We didn't talk about any of that yet.
I know, Brad, at one time you talked about we had some leftover money from the other building that we remodeled. Is that still,
Yeah, we didn't expend all the funds that we had budgeted last year.
do you know how much?
It was in the, I think just shy of $50,000. Don't remember the exact dollar amount, but I want to say it's in that $47,000, $48,000 range.
I might comment, that, Gary, you may help me with this, but this does, if this move into this building does afford us some cold storage access that we don't have right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
heated storage that we don't have now.
so some things that they would not be using, we would, not we, but Public Works would be able to move into and access would be helpful.
You can say we.
Well, it's a weak rule. So, I mean, there would be some benefits to it, Public Works, but not necessarily because we're going to do more remodeling or anything like that. That's to your question.
Well, I just think that we need to hold up on this a little bit because we're gonna have a lot of expenses coming up in the spring if this snow melts fast. We're gonna have flooding again. We're already talking about people buying out. We're gonna have that expense coming off the tax rolls. We got creek wall that we gotta worry about how we're gonna fix that. And here we are out remodeling a building right now that we could hold up on and see where we're at in the future in 2-3 months. I'm not against remodeling it, but I am it's just like getting the cart ahead of the horse. I don't know.
Just start out, I'm not a big fan of using or suggesting we use utility money for general fund expenses. So I don't know how we'd use water, electric, sewer money to fix those issues. And in the past, you haven't been willing to do that either, so.
Well, we always transfer money from electrical and water and sewer to the parks and stuff, so we have no problem with that.
Well, I don't want to do any more.
I think we've tried to get away from that.
So I hope you're not suggesting that, but I think
No,
we can
I'm
move
not
forward with this
suggesting
project.
anything. I'm just thinking that we need to hold up for a while and see where the future comes. Because we could get our backs up against a wall where it's going to be dangerous.
I think there's always going to be a certain amount of uncertainty. I think we're in a pretty good position to move forward with this project.
I agree with Bob. I mean, I'm not against it. I've been out there. I've seen what the water department has to deal with. But again, we don't know about our RD project yet. There's a lot of variables that if we could just hold off is where I'm at too on it.
How do you see us holding off on this affecting the RD project?
Well, if we get a loan, how are we going to pay that loan back? I mean, I just don't want to get too strapped and have to
I
raise.
agree. We're not in a situation where we're going to get too strapped.
So if we okay this, it's just remodeling the building, a little bit of cement, and we're not putting any more cement out for transformers in this bid.
No, just the building.
And the sign's on hold too. The sign isn't.
That's not part of this.
Do we really need, I mean, I guess I haven't seen your final plans for this, but do we need a break room in there? We got a break room across the street, across the alleyway there.
They need a place to put their iPads when they're charging them, that type of stuff that's not out in the shop itself. Where they have them now, it's out in the shop. They were grinding something using the bench grinder. One of the iPads fell off and it shattered the screen because there's no place to put them. They don't have an office. They don't have a place to put anything. It's all just on the bench. It's been wide open. You open up the door, the wind blows stuff around. They wanted a place to put their stuff so they could keep maps, put their iPads, all that stuff. And I can't guarantee that they won't sit in there from time to time and warm up or whatever in the middle of the winter. So, it is what it is. It's a room for them to utilize whichever way they want. And,
Here's the thing, when you're talking these buildings, Bob, you want to wait a couple of months. Maybe we move the bid date to the end of February instead of the 5th. Move it to the middle of February. We already have not quite a month, half a month before we even have the bid. We got 30 days. We got another month there. We'll certainly know, and within a couple of months. And you can't always just make decisions based on what could happen. You need to move forward with stuff on what we know can happen. And when it comes to remodeling buildings, making nice work environments, we need to do that for our employees. If you're going to hire, retain, and keep talented employees, you have to give them a nice place to work. They can't all work in dusty, dirty facilities and, you know, forever. I mean, look at the police department. They've been jammed in that hole for 25 years. And we're trying to get them out of there. We're trying to figure out something better. And this is really a pretty easy way to do it. It's part of the, if you will, a master plan of all of city government kind of trying to be in, or majority of it being in that one complex and in that one area, keeps all the employees together, helps with morale. If you got something you need to talk to somebody, you run across that alley, you take care of it. I mean, that's the way things operate. That's the way organizations work. And I just think you need to try to keep things up so that you can retain good talent and good employees.
And again, I'm not saying not to do it. I'm just saying, is there a better time? So, any further comment, discussion? Jen, will you take a roll call vote on this, please?
I can. Commissioner Corbin?
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldner?
Aye.
Commissioner Thill?
Nay.
And Mayor Denner.
Nay. Motion carried. Move into new business. Authorize mayor to sign 2020 annual intent to continue daycare operations, South Dakota Department of Social Services, before and after school center.
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Jen, did we have, were you going to?
Just very quickly, you have seen this before, gentlemen. This is the 2020 annual intent to continue daycare operation. You will notice the box checked is for the before and after school program in our case. Just some very basic information there. It does require the signature of the mayor in between the director and the board chairman there on page 2. Appropriate insurance documents will be forwarded as they are every year, and just procedural.
Any further comment, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Number 2, authorize mayor to sign proposal Michael Johnson Construction LLC creek cleaning. Gary, I hear this one's yours.
Unless somebody else wants to take it. Nels Nelson from the County Highway Department contacted me probably 3-4 weeks ago, and we were discussing the channels going towards the bridges over by Pete Stemper's auto body, and the other one's over on the old, well, I call it old 19, Donnie Hanson's property. He's concerned that the channels need to be straightened. And I said, well, I'll take a look at it. And I went over and looked, and I said, well, I don't have the equipment that could do that. So I said, I get a bid and, or get a price on what it would cost to remove those trees and straighten that out. And he come back with the 50-50 split between the city and the county at $42.50 each at the structure by Stemper's Auto Body, and the one on County Road 40 by Donnie Hanson would be a 50-50 split at $4,500 each. I have $7,000 in storm drainage that I kind of want to keep held back for, we used it last year for ice jams, which helped us out tremendously in the spring, and that's one year. I probably spend this 9,000, roughly 9,000. Now, I will be back probably in the spring to ask for more removal of the ice dams, so that's where we're at.
Mr. Mayor, and if I may, also, I talked to Gary a little bit. It's all right to add a little bit as well. Thank you. Mr. Nelson, the highway superintendent, talked to me also preceding some of the conversations with Mr. Gagno around November 19th or so, bringing this up to myself, and with these two properties being, I hadn't communicated with Mr. Gagno at that time, but I did talk with Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Nybert, because those were plant properties, waste plant properties. And we had a little bit of dialogue back with Mr. Nelson, Nels Nelson, initially indicating that, we wouldn't be able to do that project entirely on our own. I recall at that time, one of his concerns was some of the county structures on 456th Street, which is by Mr. Stemper's place, and 235th Street, which is by a gentleman named Mr. Hanson. And that's what it's been referred to as well. So, and then I spoke again with Mr. Nelson around December 6th, and he was going to do some more follow-up checking into it, and then he started visiting with Gary Gagno at that time. So it sounds to me like, reading between the lines, that it's somewhat of a county project. Creek cleaning helps a lot of people. I understand that, but in particular, perhaps some of the county infrastructure there, the adjacent bridges. I don't know if that's kind of what you got from Nels at the same time. So, and then I was able to observe a proposal that wasn't in the agenda packet but came through earlier today, and which outlined the costs that Gary had talked about. One concern I have, and we can talk about this, is if this is a county project and the commission would like to proceed with this, I might recommend that the commission contribute dollars towards it. If you choose to contribute towards it, and outline your proposal, your rate of, if it's 50-50 or whatever it may be, and then if you want to put in any cap, and allow the county to administer the project, their project, not a joint project. That just some of the sentiments. I caught some of this later in the day, so I haven't been able to vet it entirely. But a similar fashion, how we are, the county just contributed towards our flood study, for example. We're contractually entered in with the Corps and such, and they're just a financial partner. Yeah, but reverse, obviously, for this. I just wanted to suggest that for your consideration. If it's their project, if you will, don't mean that in any negative way, in any way, shape, or form, but and they're in control of the permitting, they're in control of paying the contractor, they're in control of liabilities, easements, whatever else there may be lingering with that. Just something to think about.
Could you update that MOU they sent over with that agreement, so we can
Probably
send
not.
it back to them?
That was a multi-page MOU that was very specific in excerpting some of the language from the flood study.
Oh.
Where it's kind of an apple.
Yeah,
and
Mike
orange.
didn't give us a lot of content here.
Yeah. It's kind of, I would describe it as somewhat of an apple and an orange type of thing. And I guess you can be as formal and informal as you're all comfortable with, or I guess what we think. So I would just submit that, and I would be happy to stand by questions. I also did. Well, you see the pictures up here. You have some printouts of the same things. You can see where they're at.
I do agree that somebody should own this project. They should be the lead. Splitting it's a little non-traditional, if you ask me.
This came to me about a month ago. We started talking about it. First time we talked about this, and then last week Gary brought it up, and I said, well, get it on the agenda for some discussion, clarification. I like the idea of it, as you say, it's being somebody's project. They own it, but we'll support it financially. I think we need to go back to them and ask them that first. Make sure that's it, they're willing to make those arrangements with us. If it's their project, to take responsibilities for those kinds of things. In the meantime, it gives us a little chance to figure out where we're going to come up with another $2,000 beyond what we have in that line. Support it financially would be of concern to you. So I support doing this. You know, two things I hear about all the time: the creeks and streets. You know, and so here we are. This is an opportunity to start doing some things in the creek, and also reaching out to another branch of government who we want to have the best relationship we can have with them. So I wonder if it would be okay to make a motion to table this. David, would that be? Sure. Since we have not made a motion at this. Do we want to go a couple weeks so we can make sure we have enough time to get back to the county, get their part in line, and do
They
our...
only meet every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And they just met today,
Right.
didn't they?
Right.
I also just wouldn't mind it from a legal perspective, just so I can understand the paper trail a little bit better. I just saw this recently, and I'm not sure how it's documented. If the city's going to participate, perhaps I'd have some thoughts on how that should look. So I wouldn't mind it being tabled either. I don't think I would need more than a week, but if you want to go 2 or whatever, that's fine. And I realize there's other reasons to
Yeah,
table.
I just want to make sure we have enough
It's
time.
not just me, but.
Yeah. And that's
I'd have
another
a-
good but that is another good reason to do this.
I have a question for David and one for Chad. First of all, for you, Chad, when we clean this out, how much more is it gonna increase the water coming through there to, when it's high, to going to Lake Madison?
I can't answer that technically. I mean, as far as a study, I mean, if you move debris or an obstacle from the creek, I guess it'll be more free flowing, you know, and be able to handle some more capacity. If you open the cross section or the square footage of the opening for the channel, more would flow through there. Large events, of course, I don't know for sure if it topped actually I do know it topped over the road, near the waste plant. But I don't know about the other location. Once it goes over that, then I would submit that the effect for a large rain event like we received is minimal. In other words, your elevation of your water surface elevation would be minimally affected by the cleaning. It probably will more so assist with the low flows and likely. In the county's opinion, that's why they approached us, they're thinking this would help with their protecting of their infrastructure, in this case their bridges. So,
The next question for David is, how much liability if we clean this out and it went in and flooded a bunch of homes at Lake Madison before it got, if their spillway is running full and we're adding more water in, who's responsible for that? The county or the city or?
Probably neither, but almost certainly not the city. When we're just cleaning out existing waterways, there's no basis for liability on that. If you were materially altering the way that the water flowed, or you were creating a dam and letting water out or something like that, there may be some circumstances under which there's liability, but a simple creek cleaning, Bob, won't trigger any liability.
Okay, thank you.
and related to that, Mr. Jinks, thank you. If there's significant changes to the geometry of the channel, there may be some floodplain permitting. Just cleaning, maintenance activity very likely would qualify for
Yeah,
that.
that's a good point, Chad, unquestionably.
Right,
Yeah.
but if you're changing the geometry, now you're talking getting a floodplain, some floodplain permitting. And again, I don't have the information to know what exactly the proposal is. I'll just leave it at that. And so therein another reason why I believe it's it's a project that's been initiated, if you will, by Lake County. I would personally, and then on behalf of what I do for the city, would think it would be most appropriate to recommend that they are in control of that project, and they're responsible for the necessary permitting, whether it's floodplain permitting by virtue of FEMA permitting, if there's a change, or U.S. Corps of Engineer permitting, or Game Fish and Park, or excuse me, DENR permitting, and so on.
Okay.
Which can all go into, David, all go into some form of an MOU to address Chad's concerns, to address the 50/50, or up to $87.50, a dollar amount within that too? Are we looking at a
Well-
more formal document?
Yeah, I mean, I want to straddle the line here. I don't necessarily think we need comprehensive or extremely exhaustive documents, but I
Sure.
just haven't seen enough to get real comfortable here yet. So whether it's some form of MOU or joint powers agreement, I think that would probably be appropriate.
I think it's a good project. It helps them with a couple bridge concerns, which is a big concern for them right now, huge concern, empathy to them. I'd like to make a motion that we table item number 2 under new business relative to the creek cleaning until February 3rd. That's 2 weeks.
Second?
Any further comment, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Under new business, number 3, set bid date, bid number 888, sidewalk improvement project 2020-2. The bid date is February 12th.
Yes.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to set bid date of February 12th on bid number 888, sidewalk improvement project 2020-2.
Second.
Chad?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Basically, this is the project that was authorized with, I apologize, now I don't, actually I may have that resolution number. There we go.
A while.
Resolution 2019-32, yeah, that was considered on December 19th, where you had basically 5th Street all the way from Prairie to Antelope, and then 4th Street from Division to Antelope, to put the sidewalks in there. And that's what this project is, to coincide with that resolution of necessity that was passed previously. And I'd be happy to stand by for further questions.
We do have $100,000 in the budget for this project.
My initial estimates are it's going to be pretty significantly below that. So, and of course, any assessment portions are parts that we, if the landowners don't do it, we pay for it, we'll carry those costs, so to speak, and then recoup them through
Recoup
an
them later.
assessment. I estimate the city cost only for the ramps is likely, $40,000 is typically what we buy for a number, if you will. Probably going to be less than 20.
You got 4th and 5th and 7th and 6th,
Yeah, those other ones.
or Summit, I mean.
Yeah, thank you. Those are some that were, one was a landowner request to be deferred, that up there on Summit, and then on 7th was, we basically missed a property on the project from last year, and just catching that, it's kind of a housekeeping thing.
Is there any more comment, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Any public comment?
Not tonight.
Announcements. Not hearing any. Do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Make a motion to go.
favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried.
You wanted these back, right, Chad?
Yes, sir. Please.